Now it's time for a review of what's making the headlines and the papers this morning with Dr. Constance Ikoku and my humble self, Benga Ashiru.
Good morning, Benga.
Good morning, Dr. Constance. And how do you feel a few hours to the Christmas?
I don't know.
So have you ticked all your bucket list?
Yeah, my mind is work. But yeah, hopefully we get some time to rest.
Indeed.
Yeah. And how are you feeling?
Well, I'm good. That excitement is always there. I think someone said Yuletide is all about a strong memory of your childhood. So that memory just keeps coming, and you know.
That's a good one. Christmas, yes. I remember it with nostalgia, actually. Yeah, we used to make several trips to the village. It was fantastic.
Indeed.
Meeting cousins, those you never heard of or you've never seen, and those you know already. So great family time. Yeah,
just as we were saying earlier, that now it seems passing through the harrowing gridlock traffic seems a new test for reuniting with your loved ones. So federal governments, all stakeholders, road safety, Festus Keyamo of the Aviation and Aerospace Development, we need your help to make this Yuletide something memorable for Nigerians.
Not only this one, we have this every year. So, and not only Christmas season, throughout the year. Nigerians need a better life.
I don't think they're asking for too much.
No, they're not. All right. Hello there and welcome to the program. Let's look at those stories that are shaping the agenda for you today. We'll be kicking off with this day newspaper. In today's papers, Nigerian front pages largely report on security, ransom and fresh kidnappings, governance as it relates to budget direction and extension of the fiscal cycle, the economy focusing on debates around tax reforms and calls for suspension of the new law, politics with INEC and the PDP, as well as Governor Makinde speaking on his meeting with the president. Across the board, papers also reflect the Christmas mood, blending hard news with calls for peace, unity and accountability, while warning that insecurity and economic strain remain unresolved despite festive optimism. Now, this day opens with a bombshell, the biggest political story of the day. Governor of Oyo State, Makinde, revealing that Minister Wike of the FCT promised to hold down the PDP for the president, a development he said triggered a difference of opinion and division between them. Another big story follows, the Independent National Electoral Commission rejecting the Turaki-led National Working Committee of the party based on court ruling. On the window, budget takes center stage as Senate praises the president's infrastructure and security push in the 58.47 trillion naira 2026 appropriation bill. And Ekiti State leads others by domesticating the new Tax Administration Act. Moving on to Daily Sun, which has gone with the Nigerian Bar Association asking the federal government to suspend the implementation of the new tax law. Also, Abia State has launched electric buses for its citizens, underscoring the government's commitment to improving transportation for residents. Daily Trust reports on security with news that kidnappers collected 2.57 billion naira in 1 year, according to a report, revealing a thriving industry. And there's more. They're using POS machines to collect ransom, which makes it easy to track if the security agencies are serious about that. On the political front, the Independent National Electoral Commission has rejected the Turaki-led NWC. We've seen that earlier. In Leadership newspaper, kidnappers demand 42 million naira ransom for 28 travelers in Plateau State. Adamawa State Governor Fintiri pardons Sunday Jackson, sentenced to death for killing herdsmen. It was said to be in self-defense, and advocates had been calling for his release. Daily Independent this morning reads about the People's Democratic Party writing the Independent National Electoral Commission, insisting there's no faction in the party. It claims INEC participated in its Ibadan convention. And PDP says committee of friends that include Wike and Anyanwu cannot be referred as a faction. And Atiku, who speaks on the tax reform, says alterations to those new tax laws amount to treason against Nigerians. New Telegraph writes about National Identification Numbers, NIN, serving as the official tax identification for citizens beginning 2026. Businesses will also no longer be required to obtain a separate tax identification number, as their Corporate Affairs Commission registration number will automatically function as their tax identification. And 114 ministries, departments and agencies failed to render accounts, while 40 did not remit internally generated revenue, according to the Independent Corrupt Practices Commission. Always a question of how government revenue is spent. Moving on to the Punch, which leads with that budget crisis and extension of the 2025 fiscal year by the National Assembly. Vanguard newspaper quotes Governor Diko Rather of Katsina as telling Nigerians to stop blaming governors alone for hardship. According to him, the federal government gets 52% of federation revenue. That leaves 48% with the governor. So, I mean, governors get a huge chunk. The sense is that the governors should actually share equal blame. And to Yoruba politics, Kwam 1 has withdrawn the suit challenging Awujale's succession process. To the international headlines this morning, let's begin with the Times. UK front pages are dominated by two main domestic stories. Revelations from newly released Epstein files focusing on emails linked to Prince Andrew. And secondly, politics and economics, highlighting the government's climb down on inheritance tax for family farms, a move framed as a costly but necessary concession after pressure from farmers and MPs. Overall, the UK press balances royal controversy with tax policy U-turns. We see that international news has taken a backseat ahead of Christmas. So the Times opens with what the royal family dreads: a photo of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor with Ghislaine Maxwell, and a splash story on the Epstein files and emails. Maxwell was said to have sought intelligent, pretty, fun girls from good families for a friend referred to as Andrew in these release files. And most importantly, a second story: farmers win the tax climb down, with Keir Starmer making a U-turn from a policy that raised inheritance threshold from £1 million to £2.5 million. Daily Mirror also leads with released Epstein emails, this time suggesting Andrew asked Maxwell to find inappropriate friends, in quote, for him. And Daily Mail front page leads on Labour softening the family farm inheritance tax by also reducing the number of estates that will pay, and calls it a humiliating U-turn for Starmer, while the Epstein files also make the front page. The I newspaper continues with the Epstein files emails with that infamous photo of Maxwell and Andrew. Daily Telegraph headlines again: Andrew asking Maxwell to find him new inappropriate friends. And then more on the farm inheritance tax policy change in the Financial Times, if you can pull that up, as fewer farmers are now expected to pay tax, shrinking the number to 15%. Daily Express front page also focuses on the same farmer stories as fight goes on to completely scrap farm raid, it says. Now let's break down what the stories mean for everyday citizens. Returning to this day newspaper, Seyi Makinde says he will not support President Tinubu, that he regrets voting for him in 2023. He also made that bombshell accusation, which is not shocking to anyone, that Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Mr. Wike, promised President Tinubu that he will hold down the PDP for him in 2027. And this partly explains the crisis in the party. Question: why is he speaking about it today or late in the day, although he did not specifically say when this meeting occurred between him, the President, Wike, and some other people? But it sounds late in the day. you know, a lot of water has passed under the bridge,
indeed,
hasn't it?
Indeed. An unending drama, if you ask me. It's quite disingenuous that someone who was part of the G5 governors that supported Tinubu's entry, that defied the PDP structure in 2023, in the build-up to the 2023 election, is now saying that he's not in sync with Wike's agreement. So at what point did things fall apart between the two parties, between his support? And so when you look at what has happened in the PDP, now, with even the INEC is not supporting the Turaki-led faction.
We'll come to that later.
We'll come back to that. But for me, I think Wike's disruptive influence has been consistent with what the law says. And so you saying that you are not supporting Tinubu for 2027, you have a choice, but nevertheless, it leaves one to ask that question, if it's the people that are actually voting, or if it's the power brokers that holds the structure of Nigeria's political transition process. So now he has made also some red herrings, like when he was 29, he hit his first $1 million. So I wanted to ask, maybe on a lighter note, that if the worth of the contract was $1 million and $1 million landed in your pockets, was the contract actually executed? Because he said he was offered a $1 million contract by an oil company, and he said he made his first $1 million. But anyway, that's by the way. I think that saying he would not support Tinubu, he's in PDP, and he's meant to be in PDP. So I wonder when we started this politics without border. I don't think it's good for the nation's democracy. It's a threat to the beauty of an inclusive democracy. It's a beauty of, it's a question, it's a snag on the integrity of Nigeria's democratic process, that we are seeing someone in PDP and pondering on whether it should not be in the realm of political discussion at all for someone in the opposition, except you are defecting. Then you let us know that you are defecting. So, well, Wike is also in the APC government, and he's still claiming to be a PDP member. So that leaves a very chaotic landscape for us to behold as we watch through the race ahead of the 2027 elections.
Quite a bit coming out from that discussion or press conference that he had with the media there in Oyo State. A lot of things that he said, he's overqualified to be president. I don't know if there's an indication that he's interested in running at some point, and he regrets supporting the president. Not only him, quite a number of people who supported the president have said that what they're seeing today is quite shocking to them. And they have thought that President Tinubu will be big or great on the economy, or great for the economy, compared to the late former President Muhammad Buhari. And a lot of people saw him as somewhat of a genius.
Yeah, you know, and we also need to watch the undertone.
Saw him as somewhat of a genius, and had ascribed a lot of the progress made in Lagos State to him. Although that is erroneous, because under his administration, nothing much was done. Successive governments after him in Lagos State moved the needle. However, what Seyi Makinde is saying, I mean, it is personal to him. He has one vote. The rest of the country will have to decide, you know, who they vote for in the presidential election. Having said that, it depends on whether the votes will count, because the sense is that President Bola Tinubu supposedly won an election when he was not in power, with all odds against him. Now that he is the president, and you have the police under him, you have the army under him, you have INEC under him,
the instrument of government.
What makes, I mean, who thinks that he will not win the election, except something from the out of the ordinary happens? So we'll have to see. And then on Wike and the PDP, Seyi Makinde's point is that it is okay for Minister Nyesom Wike to decide that President Tinubu needs to win the 2027 election, and that he can use whatever platform, but he's not the owner of the party. So he cannot be making that kind of promise to the president. And that is why we see all the crisis that is happening in PDP. And this is not surprising at all to anyone that has been watching closely events over the past couple of months or even 1 year. First of all, he accepted a ministerial appointment with an opposition party. That has never happened before, and remained in his own party. And so everything that he has done from then onwards, well, even before the 2023 election, supporting an opposition party, everything had pointed to the fact that this is where he was going. And so there's nothing that is surprising at all that has happened. However, it does say that Minister Nyesom Wike has been allowed, you know, to continue with that kind of behavior up until now, late in the day, which I think it has completely destroyed the party. It would be a miracle for that party to be resurrected before 2027. And we're going to the second story, which talks about INEC now rejecting that party, which is a bigger blow. Let me just share that.
Okay. Before that, I think that if you are having a closed-door meeting with the president at that level, we'll talk about the dynamics of political interest now. So would it suffice to say that perhaps the interest, the dynamics, the sharing formula does not swing to the whims of Governor Makinde? Because when you look at the whole thing, there is a closed-door meeting that they had to go and meet with the president of an opposing party, an opposing ruling party, indeed. And now you were a formidable member of the G5. So at what point did things fall apart? So
but we don't know when that meeting occurred.
So, but for you to be a member of the PDP and you are in bed with, permit my word, with a member of the opposition party, you are in hands and gloves with them and having a strategic meeting. I think Wike is just being politically consistent with his political interest.
We do not know. He did not say when that meeting occurred. That's number one. Number two, he's a governor in Nigeria. Any governor can have a meeting with the president. Weekly, I mean, governors fly in, have meetings with the president.
But he was a member of the G5 governor.
But that was 2023.
That was 2023. So what was supposed to have? Was he thinking, with the political reality that we know in Nigeria, that things were good, that Tinubu was not going to run for 2027 election?
Well, the point is that
they should have thought of the political consequence of what he was endorsing because everything started from the zonal crisis in the build up to 2023.
Okay, let's leave this story. Let's take the second story in this day newspaper. The Independent National Electoral Commission has rejected the Turaki-led National Working Committee of the party on grounds that there was a subsisting court judgment and unresolved legal processes. INEC said it had received requests from legal representatives of PDP asking it to recognize and update on its website the list of national officers said to have been elected by the party at the Ibadan Convention on November 15. In line with a review of all material facts, extant laws, and subsisting court judgments, INEC said the court judgments expressly restrained it from supervising, monitoring, recognizing, or giving effect to the outcome of the National Convention in Ibadan or any similar exercise pending full compliance with court orders. So what it seems like the court has become a stumbling block, obviously used at convenience across the country, especially with political parties. So this is a difficult one for the PDP, and it's a big blow, because it shows that all the crisis is unresolved, and it will continue. And until these internal disputes are legally settled, PDP risks paralysis and weakened preparedness for future elections.
Yeah, indeed.
Also, the party is sort of paying for its sins by flying Alhaji Atiku Abubakar as its candidate in 2023, when they know that it was time to allow the southern part of the country to present a presidential flag bearer. I think, again, that broke the party into pieces, and from then on, it has been unable to put its pieces back together.
So I think that it's high time the PDP faced its reality. First, everything started from what you said, placing the Atiku. I wouldn't want to use use Atiku Abubakar in personal sense, but I would say that the failure of the PDP to adhere to an equitable and fair zoning structure that brought in Alhaji Atiku Abubakar as its presidential flag bearer in 2023 elections.
But he was involved.
Yes, they are paying for it now.
Yes.
So now, we talk about timelines of several multiple court judgments that the PDP had flagrantly defied. And a lot of people see me as a PDP antagonist. I'm not a supporter of any party, but the fact is that you cannot close your eyes to multiple court judgments. You cannot build on a faulty foundation. So when you look at the PDP, first was the need to conduct the Enugu and Anambra fresh Congress in line with substitute court order. That was ignored. We also have the need for a new Southeast Congress, the adoption of what the court held in the South-South Zonal Congress. Everything was defied. Even the zoning formula, which is being micromanaged, there was an underground agreement that it should have remained in the North Central. So a lot of things. You know, we had the national chairman of the PDP recently, and now the conflicting court judgment between the Federal High Court in Abuja that called for the suspension of the National Convention, and the Oyo High Court, which looked like it looked like a charade, if you ask me.
Well, it's interesting what's happening in the PDP, and we don't know when this is going to end. And it's unfortunate because the Turaki-led NWC, came out with a lot of agility and hoping that they can turn around the fortunes of the party. For me, it looks like a fallacy of wishful thinking. But when you also look at the history of the party, the 16 years that the party was in power, they rode roughshod over many people. And there were a lot of failures within the party in terms of discipline, in terms of members behaving in a way they should not, in terms of governors, running amok. So that kind of behavior they carried on when they lost power. And so they have not found their feet in terms of reforming the party. For PDP to rise again, there will need to be a serious reform of the workings of the party and how it is run. There's also an opportunity for them to latch on to younger people. If they truly want the party to survive or the party to rise from dust, they might have to change their way of thinking and decide, you know what, we want to make this party a party of young people, we want to invite them, we want to change it completely. But it doesn't seem like they want to do that. They are still stuck in their old ways of doing things. And that old way of doing things will never change that party.
If you remember, there was even a court order on who has the legal right to engage a party council between the PDP national chairman and the party's legal advisor. And there was also a court issue regarding the micro zoning of the party's chairmanship to the Northwest, which it was expected that the Northwest caucus would decide, but we witnessed a different thing. Even the obtaining of the expression of interest form, some were told to go and get their expression of interest from Adamawa. So such a very chaotic situation. It has closed its eyes to the spirit of transparency, fairness, and equity. And if it continues to ignore these three elegant principles of democracy, its internal structure will continue to be at risk. Okay,
let's look at Daily Independent this morning. Alteration to Tinubu's tax reform law is an act of treason, according to Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, former vice president. The Nigerian Bar Association also called on the country to suspend the implementation of these tax laws. Atiku described the unauthorized changes as direct assault on constitutional democracy and reveals a government that is more interested in attracting wealth from struggling citizens than empowering them. The unconstitutional alterations are reported to be, number one, new coercive powers without legislative consent, which includes arrest powers granted to tax authorities, property seizure and garnishment without court orders, mandatory 20% security deposit before appealing tax assessments, compound interest on tax debt, removal of accountability mechanisms, removal of ministerial supervisory provisions, which insulates the government from accountability and which leads to authoritarianism. So what is Atiku Abubakar demanding? He's demanding and calling for an immediate suspension of this implementation of the law effective January 1 to allow for proper investigation. He also says that illegal alterations have to be rectified through proper legislative processes, and those that are responsible must be held accountable for constitutional breach. There's also a lot more that he asks, but Benga, egregious stuff right here. How does anyone tinker with the law that has been passed by the National Assembly? The test will be whether anybody or any group of persons that are involved are actually held responsible. So then the probe needs to be carried out to logical conclusion.
Now,
they can't sweep this under the carpet.
Indeed, it
They
shouldn't
can't.
be, but I hope it doesn't get swept under the carpet. But number one, I think it's called a budget when it's still in the preparatory stage, when it's still in the planning stage, when it's still
No,
in
we're talking about tax reform.
Yes, it's called a tax reform when it's still in the preparatory stage, when it's still within the gestation period. But as soon as it has been passed by the National Assembly, it becomes an act. And we, even from our elementary government, we understand that the law is supreme. So you cannot alter it. You can tinker with it before it's been passed. You can do some insertions before it's been passed. But after it's been endorsed as an act signed by the president, it's been passed by the National Assembly, signed by the president, it becomes an incontrovertible law that must be respected by even the #1 citizen of the country, the president himself. So it brings a sense of fiscal irresponsibility to us as a nation, and especially the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. For a clause as sensitive as Section 41, subsection 8 of the Tax Reform Act that says that it is mandating a deposit of 20%, and the President of the Presidential Tax and Fiscal Reforms, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, was asking, how did it get there? And the representative, the name has not been disclosed yet, said that the National Assembly is yet to meet on this. So it does not show seriousness on the nation. So to a large extent, maybe not exactly treason has been described by Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, but I do support him fundamentally that this is an assault to the nation's constitutional democracy. It
is. And as usual, normally when incidents occur of this nature, everything is eventually swept under the carpet.
Indeed.
And that is not what Nigerians want to see in this specific instance, especially because this alteration, I think, speaks to the level of disregard for the Nigerian state.
Indeed.
By either an individual who was involved or the group of persons that was involved. The test will be whether we actually make sure that these people pay for what they did. And as we can see, the alterations seek to empower the tax authorities beyond what was approved by the National Assembly, the body that is responsible for making laws. But another angle to examine in everything here is the assumed or supposed positive impact of these tax reforms on citizens, on Nigerians. So it places, I mean, it looks like what is happening here, or we know what is happening here, is that what was applied in Lagos State is being applied on Nigeria. Because we have a president who effectively, when he was governor of Lagos State, improved taxation.
Yeah, indeed.
Tax collection in that part of the country. It actually was a revolution of tax collection in that part of the country. And we are literally adopting the Lagos model on Nigeria. But the question is, how did effective taxation change the lives of residents of Lagos State? Despite Lagos State's reputation as Nigeria's most efficient tax collector, the lived experiences of many residents suggest that higher and better organized taxation has not translated into broad improvements in their quality of life. Millions of Lagosians continue to grapple with crumbling roads, even in the top areas like Ikoyi. You know, there's chronic traffic gridlock, flooding, poor public schools, overstretched healthcare facilities, unreliable public transport. Although we do have the railway system now. Even as, I mean, the tax net has widened, but the sense is that it doesn't match the level of improvement of life in that part of the country. So this disconnect fuels public resentment with the government, and that is what is going to happen next year by the time this tax reform begin to hit our pockets. You know, it will be insufficient, because if we're not seeing visible, equitable, people-centered deployment of those tax proceeds and transparent use of them, so how are you prioritizing the welfare of people?
I think more than ever, there is a need for the National Assembly, for governance to prioritize performance, and there is a need to set key performance index for even the president's performance. So that failure to achieve this, like you were saying that the target of oil production should be 3 million barrels per day. And now we are still operating at so amount of 1.5 million approximately million barrel per day. That's a shortfall. So we look at many of these areas, and we evaluate the indices of performance of the government, and that should be like a performance bond,
right, okay,
which should determine their continuation in office or not.
Let's take the international story here. Central African Republic holds election on the 28th of this month. The ballot will include presidential, parliamentary elections, and municipal elections for the first time in decades. An estimated 2.3 million voters are registered to cast their votes. The elections come after a highly controversial 2023 constitutional referendum which removed presidential term limits and opened the door for President Faustin Archange Touadera to remain in power indefinitely. Two of the country's most prominent political figures, former Prime Ministers Anissa Georges Dologuele and Henry Maria Dondra, were barred from entering the race until November 14, when the Constitutional Council decided to allow them to run as candidates. So the current president, first elected in 2016 and re-elected in 2020, declared his intention to run again in July. And there are a lot of expectations regarding this particular election, because this is a war-torn country that is really looking for stability and some peace and some unity. And so if this election goes well, then the country will be able to hold it together. But if it does not, it risks tearing it apart completely. So
when the echoes was raised, when it was being re-echoed that democracy is indeed in crisis in Africa, I think these are the telltale signs. This is someone that has been in government since 2016. He has two opponents that and within that close to 10 years, which will clock 10 by March next year, 2026, we've seen a brazen repression of opposition figures. Now, even the two leading opposition figures that are quite formidable, he made a bold attempt to disenfranchise them, to disqualify them from contesting, which the court refused. Thank goodness for the court standing its ground to ensure this inclusivity. But when you look at the texture, the political atmosphere of the Central African Republic ahead of the election coming up in the 28th of December, it leaves a lot of signs of political uncertainty for a country that battles with high-level poverty and lack of performance from its government.
Well, the current president says that one of the reasons why he wants to run again for election is that he has managed to bring in some form of stability within the country. So really there have been improvements in the security situation. At the same time, we know that it remains a very fragile country. Indeed. In broader terms, and violence has reduced, but you have, pockets of the country being controlled by rebel forces. Yeah. So it's not a country that has total control by the person that calls himself president. And so if this election goes very badly and poorly, it means that these rebel forces can, mount a challenge again to the president.
Yeah, when
authority.
when we talk of the rebel forces, we also should look at the president's angle too, that has a close alliance with Russian private security forces, the Wrangler team. So it's their world against each other. It's not a fair ground, and I think that this is where the African Union should come into the civic space of the Central African Republic to ensure that this political transition come 28th of December, that they get it right, that it should reflect the triumph of the wishes of majority of its citizens in Central African Republic.
Indeed, the Wagner group from Russia, mercenaries, have been helping the president to tackle the insecurity within the country.
The election process.
Yeah, but as to African Union seems, hampered in a lot of ways.
Indeed.
I don't think that it has what it takes at this moment to really intervene in Central African Republic. We do have the United Nations present there with forces to protect civilians, and so it is there. It has to an extent helped to ensure that there's a modicum of peace within the country. But that peace, again, as I said, is very fragile, and we'll see how these elections go.
Yeah, I think it's one thing to establish and to agree in principle the tenet of democracy, and I think it's another thing to take proactive steps to deepen and build democratic institutions. Because when the African Union signed when they adopted the 2007 protocol for democracy and governance, I think they just went to sleep, and instead of trying to find how they can deepen these institutions and make it work for Africa, I think they left it at the paper stage.
Leaving it at the paper stage, a lot of challenges. We did see that peace deal that was signed with Democratic of Congo between
brokered
DRC,
by the US.
Rwanda. The M23 rebels were not, on seat with them. But I heard that recently they had withdrawn from a key state in the eastern part of the region. In spite of that, the Trump administration says they're not satisfied with what the M23 rebels are doing. And so it means that peace deal, it is holding, but it is still not what is expected from the beginning after the deal was signed.
I think I'm a bit skeptical with the Trump ceasefire plan because we've seen what he did in Gaza, not being able to address the two-state solution till date. The Israelis are still Netanyahu-led government is still making its stance clear that anyone who respects the state of Palestine is an enemy to Israel. So likewise, a crisis that has spanned over 3 decades between the Rwanda M23 rebel and DR Congo, I think the inside story, the bone of contention has not really been ironed out. I think Trump is just hasty to achieve this peace accolades to himself.
And the Epstein files. Wow. Can we go back? Can we pull up the Times newspaper again with that photo of Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew? I bet the royal family doesn't want to see this at all. Andrew has almost been, sort of disowned, if I may use that word, by the royal family when this whole thing started, and now it's getting even worse with more emails being released. It's not only Prince Andrew on the hot seat. President Donald Trump is also on the hot seat, with Democrats and Republicans fighting cat and mouse, against one another about the delays in the release of those files and reduction and the whole of it. But it is really messy.
I think a lot coming from the Pandora box, if you ask me, and this speaks to the integrity of the Western-styled democracy and governance that have presented themselves as the perfect model to follow. I think it questions the integrity of the system of the U.S. that has prided himself as a shining light of governance and democracy to other world. I think a lot should be done to make governance more accountable, because in a culture of impunity, when you demand for accountability, it seems like you are launching an attack.
And when you look at the details, it says Maxwell was asked to seek for intelligent, pretty, fun girls from good families for the prince.
Indeed.
In other instances, she was asked to look for inappropriate friends, in quote, for the prince. I mean, it just speaks to what happens behind closed doors and what happens with people in high places. And if these emails were not released, probably we will not get to this stage. But it just shows how powerful that ring was, Epstein and Maxwell, and what they did. We've seen all the stories of the girls, or some of the girls that were involved, that came forward to say how they were abused, you know, by men. Some of the men were supposed to be people that could have been their fathers, and how they think that they have not gotten justice yet because of the kind of people that were involved. And we also see attempts by all the high-profile people to make sure that this does not go beyond what it is now. But I think that there will be more that will be coming from this particular story. And let's quickly also look at Zacchaeus Tama and the inheritance tax and the farmers. From day one, the farmers had said that we're going to fight this inheritance tax on them because they do not want a situation where their business is crippled. And who even thought about this inheritance tax on farmers specifically? And now it has come crumbling down.
I think very soon government will start to tax the air we breathe in, if you ask me. Yeah. And that's is a kind of fiscal indiscipline, if you ask me, that is beginning to encroach into governance style from the West to every part of the world. I think government should do better than to find an alternative. In Nigeria, we have the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission that is responsible to profile means for government to expand its revenue base, expand it, diversify its economic base. I don't know what is being done to many of the recommendations coming from the from RAMFAC, for instance. I think that it's not good enough that the citizens should be the one to pay every part of the. I think Section 14 of the Nigeria's Constitution says that security and welfare shall be the primary responsibility of government, and I think it's quite disingenuous to see government passing back this responsibility back to the helpless citizens.
As it relates to Nigeria and taxation, what we are seeing is that there is pressure internationally on Nigeria to be able to pay its debt. And so if you're going to be paying those IMF debts, World Bank debt, and the rest of them, you have to find the money. You cannot be collecting loan to be paying debt. So one of the argument is that if you widen the tax bracket and increase taxes, then you'll be able to fund those debts. I think that's what is going on. We're going to be seeing a lot with this new tax law next year. I don't think Nigerians don't know what they are in for. By the time the implementation begins, people will be distressed.
I think it reflects the drive for a quick fix and lack of intellectual alternative to address the task of governance. If you ask me, Nigeria is rich in a lot of mineral resources. Now we're beginning to show a vast potential of lithium, which is being called the new gold. So I think some months ago, about a year ago, we had this oil for wealth deal that we signed, that we could get some money from international organizations in exchange for our oil. So likewise, we could expand that initiative to other mineral resources and address this huge deficit that is embodying the country's fiscal landscape.
All right. The final note is that, yes, we know that Nigeria is a country where a lot of people don't actually pay tax. Yes, you can reform the tax law, but make sure that the money is used appropriately. Those were your headlines today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Constance. That's quite insightful.